Welcome everybody to our Code to Consequence panel discussion. Over the next hour, we're going to try and explore some of the challenges that face you and have faced our panelists around artificial intelligence. We know AI is a tool that's just grown unbelievably fast with so many people throwing information and money at it. But of course, with the speed these things happen, there's still confusions, there's still concerns, and there's risks it brings. And we're hoping to look at some of those risks, to touch on perhaps some of the mitigations. But we only have an hour, so we will press on. We can't do everything, but we will certainly have a try to give you some good information. I'm Steve Scrace. I'm going to be the facilitator today, talk with our amazing panel, and I hope we're going to have a really good discussion together. What we're going to do now is just have a very brief touch on some of the key things to do with the problems that we face. The problem isn't just bad data, as we know, and often we have bad decisions and we have slick marketing going on. We all know the computer says no, and how we just believe it. We just assume, yes, it's all good, when we have no real understanding. We often assume that just because something's done much faster, that's better. Well, that's a very questionable approach. And I think really importantly, things like bias, that if you have bad data, AI can actually be, we've heard many of the stories about how it can actually amplify and make bias even more extreme. And it brings you to this point of where AI, if no one is accountable, then it becomes a real challenge. There has to be accountability. There has to be some real thought behind the governance associated. So with that in mind, let's move on. Obviously, as In the Know, we're sponsoring and have put this meeting together. I brought together these amazing panelists. Why did we bother doing it? Well, because we spent our time, our careers, looking at data and information governance and looking at intelligence delivery, looking at the balancing of privacy and utility, looking at how these things can actually coexist properly. And therefore, AI was a natural subject for us to move into and to work on and to be very involved in. But this particular subject we feel is one that's really much bigger, and it needs to be spread out. It needs to be discussed widely. Hence today, we're pleased to be hosting this particular meeting. So I think what we can do now is go on and let's introduce you to the panel. So we've got three people on the panel today. We have John Varlow, we have Tia Chiang, we have Hugh Davis. And so let's start off with a brief intro. I have to put my head down and read these because they're amazing CVs and I don't want to miss a bit of it. So John Varlow is an award-winning expert in data analytics and information governance with over a quarter of a century, I like to say it that way, it makes it sound much longer, of experience in the public sector. He previously served as Executive Director at the NHS Information Centre and National Director of Analysis at NHS Digital, where he also oversaw national data flows, official statistics, and GDPR implementation. He also chaired national boards on data standards, indicator design, sustainability, and data ethics. And John specializes in data strategy, automation, and digital transformation. He played a key role in developing Gibraltar's COVID-19 reporting systems. And John's also a regular blogger and contributor to discussions on AI and data ethics. I think I heard something like 20 different blogs you get involved in and work in, John, but it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
No, thank you, Steve. Looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Next, we have Hugh Davies, and Hugh's Director of Davis Furlong Consulting, specializing in operational design and training within healthcare. He's co-founder of the Consortium for Healthcare Analytics Intelligence. And it's actually put here as the godfather of the National Competency Framework for Data Professionals in Health and Care. Hugh is a leading proponent of the professionalisation of analytics in the NHS. I love that term, godfather. You'll have to explain that one day, Hugh. In addition to this, Hugh's commercial director for the Association of Professional Healthcare Analysts and founding member of the Chief Data and Analytics Officer Network. And I believe a huge congratulations in order to you, Hugh, in that you're now a doctor in decision risk and analytics on miscommunication between analysts and operational requesters of information. Hugh, it's fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Really excited.
I'm glad to hear it. Last, but absolutely by no means least, is Tia Chiang. Now, Tia is founder of Capstone Digital. She advises global organizations on leveraging AI and data strategically. Tia shapes the UK's digital skills agenda and actively influences AI policy at the House of Lords. We've got to ask you about that at some point. We're going to have to bring that up. Tia spent 10 years working across the NHS in the field of data and analytics, and now independently supports health tech companies to launch and scale commercially. Her strategic work includes authoring NHS Wales National Data Strategy and advising on transformational initiatives for healthcare systems. Also currently serving on the board of the College of Radiographers, bringing patient focus to innovative clinical practices across radiography. Tia, fantastic to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to today.
Right, and now the three of you have all got to work for your supper. And so let's kick off with some questions to get things going. But perhaps we could start with you, Tia. Let's focus in some of your experience. And just let's touch on what are the most common risks when organizations treat AI governance as an afterthought, as an add-on, just something that they think they ought to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. And maybe to frame the conversation, we talk about what actually do we mean when we talk about AI governance, just to sort of set the tone. So when we talk about AI governance, we're also talking about standard, good old-fashioned solid data governance as well, the two of them working together. So do we care about the data? Do we care about the lineage? Do we care about the data quality? But equally, how are we managing those models? How are we managing the practices surrounding that AI as well? So that's what we mean when we talk about data and AI governance in this particular instance. But in terms of what the risks and impacts of poor AI governance can have on a business, it can be anything from kind of model drift and performance degradation, where you run something, it takes a long time, or it gives you inaccurate results. So the AI actually works, but the outputs are not in line with your expectations. You can obviously get into problems around regulatory non-compliance, so things like GDPR and those sorts of things, or even in terms of...
Perhaps I could just interrupt your flow slightly. You mentioned regulatory compliance. Are there any regulatory compliance for networks available at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the kind of regulations that we have in place around AI at the moment, we've obviously got the old GDPR stuff that still covers the data, but the EU AI Act went live, I think it was in January earlier this year, at a very high level. And then I think we're looking at is it August, I think, for the rest of the stuff when it comes live, and it looks very much like the EU is still pushing forward for that. There was a question around whether it would be deferred, but I think it will still progress. So there are some key obligations that businesses need to be compliant with, and there's plenty of legal advice out there for them to kind of follow in terms of step-by-step practices. But there's also stuff that can affect their models if they haven't done good governance around bias and discrimination. So if you work in financial services, for example, if you have bias within your data, then it could affect things like loan applications. You could have problems with mortgages and those sorts of things, and it's one of the reasons why the EU AI Act categorizes AI applications into high, medium, and low level risks. And if you're in the financial services sector, that is very high risk. But equally, healthcare services are also in that risk, because there is a impact to patients that we need to really work through. And for anything that is in the health AI space, then that all has to go through a higher level of certification, which is all kind of laid out that you can follow. But there's also things around explainability. People want to have trust in AI, and if you don't have that explainability around your models and what it's happening and how it's making those decisions, actually you can quite rapidly lose trust, and that can have significant reputational damage for your organization. So if you look at things, Cambridge Analytica, for example, and that stuff that happened quite a number of years ago, that still has long-lasting reputational issues for those organizations that were involved in that, and it hasn't gone away. So there's quite significant risks there, without even getting into the stuff around cybersecurity and what needs to be done from a protections perspective as well. So there's quite a lot of risks that people need to think about alongside the opportunities. And I'm a big believer that governance is a good way to unlock opportunities, but do it in a safe, well-managed fashion.
Sorry, Steve, this is a question based on something Tia mentioned, that the risks of regulation. Obviously, we've got the Act on the one side, and then you have the American approach, which is very much more unregulated, if you will. Does the existence of largely unregulated environment render the regulations imposed by others inadequate? It's a bit like just thinking a bit like genetically modified crops. There's no point saying we're only going to release it in this field, because sooner or later the genetically modified codex is going to be everywhere.
And I think your question is a really good one. Tia, lovely to hear what you have to say on that score.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sort of in line with Hugh in his thinking that it's a lot like vaccination. You need a certain amount of people to kind of have it be effective. Now, I was at a summit only last week where the US took a very strong stance in terms of where it sees regulation, which is innovation first. Regulation should be very light touch, because they're thinking of it in terms of how can they cultivate innovation and US economy. And I think there are a lot of countries thinking in those terms. But ultimately, the base data that comes from is citizen data, whether that's from the US or whether it's international data. And I think that we need to really think about the impacts that has on citizens. And I think there's actually there is a thought internationally that we need to take a more balanced approach around regulation. And I think that whilst the US administration have a very anti-regulation approach, I think ultimately, if you want to do I suppose work internationally and you want to sell those products, if you're an OpenAI or you're a Microsoft or you're a Meta, if you want to have customers who are overseas, you're then going to have to fall in line with the EU AI Act, because it covers citizens rather than borders. And it, ultimately, I think it will come down to the economics. If they want to access that broad market across the EU, then they will have to fall in line. And when you're looking then at how do you build a platform, you can't have realistically separate setups for governance for every single country. I think what will eventually happen is that everyone else will fall in line with the EU. The EU may have to sort of water down and tweak some of that regulation, but I think ultimately that's probably where the world will end up, much in the same way as GDPR has kind of spread internationally and everywhere has similar flavors. So I think that's kind of where we'll end up.
John, do you have anything to add to that?
Not in particularly in terms of that, although I do think that the EU Act, I mean, especially useful is their kind of categorization of AI and the fact that he puts it into 4 different levels. So it really says kind of 3 levels are fine, but one of them isn't. So it talks about things which are unacceptable AI, and really when it's I mean, I simplified, messing with people's lives, so doing biometric, real-time biometric monitoring and those kind of things. The EU has said, unless this is for government, or I think it said military purposes as well, but typically government, as it is not allowed. Fundamentally, no one can be playing in that space. And going back to Hugh's point, if you don't have regulations, people are playing in that space, and that's where it's dangerous, and that's where you need to have accountability. And obviously for me, accountability is key. If you don't have regulations, then you've got to be accountable for your decisions. And I think the other thing to say is we've dived in and we've talked about AI, but actually no one really knows what AI is. So it's one of these kind of blanket terms that we talk about. And I think the other day I was looking at an AI-enabled toothbrush, and I've got no idea actually how that could possibly work. Does it brush your teeth automatically? What does it do? So you've got an AI kettle, you've got AI toasters, you've got AI plastered on everything. AI can be as simple as if this then that, and so something very simple set of rules, through to what we'd call ASI, artificial super intelligence. Doesn't exist, but it's that spectrum, and it's absolutely huge. Most of what we're talking about in terms of AI at the moment is a mixture of symbolic AI, which is basically stuff which follows a set of rules. And actually, when you're thinking about things like smart watches, or you're thinking about things like diagnostics, most of that is about a set of rules. If this is seen, then it means something. And computers and technology is far better at that than we are. But actually, a lot or most of what we use is what we call generative AI. So we're talking about things, usually large language models. And whether you're looking at photos or those kind of things, it follows the same approach. And that's all based around what you'd call probabilistic pattern matching. And the clue is in the word probabilistic. So it's about probabilities. It's not about certainties. So large language models just have a massive amount of data, and then basically the model just predicts what the most probable next word is in terms of response to you. And most of the time that's right, but some of the time it's wrong. And that's not the model's fault. That's just the way that it's designed in terms of being that sort of model. What that means is that if you've got anything which is based on a large language model, even if you've got some symbolic components to it, you cannot trust the AI. There is always going to be a chance that what you see isn't correct. And we see this, we call it hallucination. So if you're on ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you like to use, and you put in something, occasionally it'll just make things up, or it'll just forget where it is, or you ask it to do something and it doesn't do it. And it's just because it's probabilistically doing the thing that actually is most likely, not particularly what you've asked it, and it has no idea of what it's just said. It's got no idea of the context. It's no idea of who you are. It's got no idea of the world it's operating in. It's just a statistical model. It's a really, really clever one, but it's just a statistical model. And statistics aren't about certainty, they're about probabilities.
Sorry, John, I was thinking, isn't that just the flip side of a different coin when you discuss human decision making? There's no certainty there. In fact, the likelihood of our correctness is more remote than the probability being correct, only that we have context and, we'll use the term understanding, for want of a better one, to redirect any erroneous thoughts. But we're still talking about the same.
We are, but absolutely what you just said in terms of we've got the context and we have the ability to redirect is exactly the point. So if you go on the internet and you do something like a Google search and you get a whole load of results, you'll look at some of the results and go, nah, that's just not relevant. Yeah, or that's just not true. Or actually, that's not suitable in the context. Or that was 10 years ago. Or, oh, that's written by so-and-so. And actually, they just talk nonsense. There's a whole load of things that you actually use your brain and you use the context and use everything that you've known before to actually come to a conclusion. And yeah, sometimes we're wrong. Everybody is wrong, occasionally, even me. But having that kind of that context helps. And it's not to say that AI isn't really accurate. In a lot of things, it's a lot better than humans, but you only have to be wrong once. It's not that it's right 9 million times. It's the fact that it's wrong once. And if that wrong once is something which is really, really important and no one takes accountability, you're in loads of problems. So
I guess an example of that might be the Tesla cars, self-drive cars. One accident undermines the whole thing.
absolutely. Let's take an extreme. Let's say you're going to use AI for military purposes and to decide whether you need to go into nuclear war. We all saw the film War Games in the, what was it,
Right.
70s with Matthew Broderick and those kind of things, and he's playing a game but the computer thinks it's real. But actually it's not a bad scenario. It's a kind of thing of AI has got no context.
Yeah, but
so it'll think things are real.
Can I interrupt you there, John? Let's bring it back to perhaps things a little more. I mean, those are absolutely critical things, but we were sort of starting to lead into the idea of accountability.
Absolutely.
So talk about that at a much more company level, an organizational level. We've got some wonderful ideas and it's great to hear this discussion. Let's try and think a little bit more about what accountability means to an organization.
So I think everything that I've just said is fundamental to accountability, because actually accountability, the responsibility for your AI, it doesn't rest with the AI. Okay, people say, well, the AI did it, so it's the AI's fault. That's nonsense. AI is a tool. It can't think, it can't feel, it can't do right, it can't do wrong. It just is based on a statistical process. So responsibility lies usually with the organization that's actually put that AI in place. Sometimes it might lie with the developer. So someone develops AI, they do the wrong code, they do the wrong thing, and they put out a model that says, well, I mean, we've seen it recently, haven't we, with Grok and others that have just come out where it said things which it really shouldn't have. And I think that's kind of set that particular model back a little bit. So sometimes it's in the development, but usually it's in the implementation. So people put AI into place and they think, actually, there we go. We don't need to think anymore. The AI will do it. And the people who are using the AI, they take results of that AI and say, well, that's the answer. Well, if you're taking results and you're saying that's the answer and you're not checking it, the responsibility then lies with you. So accountability lies in different places, and every organization really needs to think about how are they using AI, what could happen. And I like to call it the Dr. Pepper scenario. So you remember the Dr. Pepper advert where we say,
oh, no, I don't. You'll have to remind me. You'll have to remind me.
You can't remember, but usually there's something and something kind of weird happens as someone's drinking a drink of Dr. Pepper. And the slogan was, what's the worst that could happen? But it's a really good slogan to have in business. We're putting this in place. What's the worst that could happen? What would happen if the AI did this? What would happen if it did that? And whose responsibility would it be? Exactly the same as if you put a new employee into the business, a new employee who knows nothing about the business, knows nothing about context, knows nothing. You wouldn't just go, okay, hit the ground running, go and do what else, make decisions. We don't want to see it. You wouldn't. You'd say, actually, we need to check. We need to check that actually you're making the right decisions until you learn, until you know what the context is, until you know what this business wants to do. Exactly the same as AI.
Maybe I could, I mean, you talk about that, the accountability, and that implies that the organizational mandates and takes the thought of that. But that then brings us back to the whole question of what the ethics are behind this, what you should be applying yourself to. And I think we have an expert in that area with Hugh. And maybe Hugh, you could, don't look elsewhere when you know it's you. Perhaps Hugh, you could give us some thoughts on the ethics behind it at a practical level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the ethics is a complicated situation because you're looking at the use of AI on many, many levels. Is it ethically sound to expedite processes within an organization that results in a significant number of redundancies from people that can do from machines that can do the thinking for us? Arguably, it's what was adopted by Henry Ford and the Toyota manufacturing system, etc. So there are those issues. There are other issues about the sorts of accountabilities that you can look at. I mean, ultimately, when you look at ethical responsibilities, it is the ethical responsibility of any organization embroiled with using any form of artificial intelligence that an accountability structure is firmly in place. Then, as John says, the developer, there are certain elements of accountability they need. Personally, I think the most fundamental ethical decision an organization can make in relation to AI is to ensure that AI is not empowered to on its intelligence. Again, use the term advisedly, but there can be no executive authority bestowed. There should be no executive authority bestowed upon artificial intelligence. Ultimately, it will come up with an answer, but there needs to be human intervention at that point to say, yeah, that's correct. This is what needs to be done. Because that's where the accountability lies. All the computational wizardry that AI can get up to is fantastic. And yes, it does hallucinate. Yes, it does lie. And actually recently proven it does, or it has the ability to protect itself over decisions to be unplugged. There are recent scenarios where AI has been told or informed that it's going to be replaced with a better model, and it goes through scenarios of embedding itself on another server so that it can come back online and replace the one that is trying to replace it. Crazy
Are you
stuff.
sure that wasn't just 2001 you were watching again?
Well, I wish it was. And there are much bigger issues when it comes to AI, and everyone says we shouldn't talk about the existential threat, and I think it is a conversation that needs to be had because it exists. However, the first thing that we need to do is just to make sure that no actions can be taken by AI beyond the computational assessment without the accountability of an individual that can take the circumspect and ethical view.
Okay, I think there's a question from you, Tia.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there, Hugh, and I have my own concerns. So we've spent the last sort of 2-3 years in the world of generative AI. ChatGPT is now a big thing, and people have gone off, learnt how to use it, and they've built their own AI agents, which is a one-stop, one-stage piece of AI. You query it, it gives you something back. But as we now begin to see the emergence of agentic AI, where we're looking at multi-stage activities undertaken by AI, we're sort of removing the human from that loop, that sort of first, I suppose, first line of defense when it comes to ethics of actually, is the output right? Am I questioning it? But if we look at the kind of growth in the agentic space, and it's only going to get more and more complex and more widespread in terms of its use, the human in the loop for that is either going to be at the very, very last stage or not at all. And I'd be interested to kind of hear what your thoughts are around that, or if you have any ideas around how we begin to think about ethics in that space in a sort of, I suppose, preventative way, because the human won't be in that loop.
Absolutely. I think ideally, you'd say, yeah, at every time that, at every set of decisions, that's when you should have human interaction. It's not going to be possible. Ultimately, these layers are going to become quantum as they occur, and actually as it develops, you're not going to have you may not even have enough humans on the planet in some instances to sit and curate the decisions made. However, that before any action, any physical action or any consequential movement from that decision is made, there should always be human assessment, evaluation. It could be done by one, it could be a committee. not that everything ever gets solved by committee, but from an ethical perspective, until, and we're talking futurisms here, until we are assimilated with the technology that we're developing, i.e., that is to say, we are controlling the decisions it makes simultaneously with it making it, and until our intellect is augmented by machines, we have to be the ones, if it's going to be on our framework, we have to be the ones to say whether it's right or wrong. We trust ourselves to build these machines, then we should trust ourselves to say when they're not working.
John, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to go back to the EU AI Act. I mean, one of the really useful things in it, we talked about where it talks about unacceptable AI. So, you know, I say for things which are banned outright, but the next level within there is high risk AI, and that's where basically things have got a major human impact. So whenever you're making decisions about human beings, whether it's about filtering for jobs, filtering job applications, or it might be things about education, or particular things in terms of healthcare and predictive models, those kind of things, the EU Act is very clear that you must have human oversight and control. That is a thing. Without having, you know, any of those kind of things, if you don't have that, you can't have that AI. And alongside that is about documentation and traceability. So, you know, can you see all stages of the process? No, possibly not in terms of oversight, but actually understanding how that kind of particular process works, how that AI makes the particular decisions. And that's not understanding the source code, but it's understanding exactly what processes does it go through, where could you get the errors, and actually how do we have oversight at each of those stages. So explainability and transparency is absolutely kind of key in terms of this. And you've got,
if I may, John, you brought me back to a question I wanted to ask, because you mentioned this earlier, Tia, about explainability. And I was doing some looking earlier, and these kind of the teams that we put together to do AI systems, you have domain experts, you have data scientists, you have machine learning engineers, you have product managers, you have ethics compliance officers, IT security people. And I'm reminded of a Dilbert cartoon, where, if those of you are familiar, Dilbert is a very geeky systems engineer who develops products. And I remember him showing this, the first picture shows him with a very complicated product, and it's wonderful. It's got amazing things. And he goes through the different levels of manager. And by the time he gets to the senior CEO who's going to agree it's a picture of a happy face. It's the emoticon that says it's going to be a lovely product that'll do everything. So I think explainability, particularly for the people who are on this call, I mean, how do we deal with explainability of what can be such a complex product? I mean, it can be very simple, as you said, John, but how will we get that across to the teams that we're working with and the organizations we're parts of? Anybody like to have a go at that one?
I'll gladly take that. I think it's a question of functionality. It's something is great if it's got a purpose. So what is the purpose of the system that we're developing? You know, ultimately, it is entirely plausible and achievable now for a doctor to walk into a ward with a pair of Ray-Bans on. Other sunglasses are available, though I'm not sure they have the same level of integration with Meta. They can look at a patient, discuss their ailment, whilst the glasses are listening to everything, maybe even doing the recognition of symptoms as well themselves. The doctor can then say what they think to the patient, and whilst leaving, the machine in the background, whichever AI program you've developed, can assess what the doctor has seen and come up with a conclusion and a recommendation for the doctor to use. that is an inexplicable situation. Ultimately, the GP can do, or the doctor can say, yeah, that's absolutely fine. They're the drugs we need. Send it off to pharmacy. And then that message will get relayed across to pharmacy, and then pharmacy will read it, prepare it, and then the pharmacist will check the product. What you're doing in that situation is you're describing the function of AI, what it's there to do. It's there to treat the patient in the same way that the doctor is there to treat the patient, in the same way that the pharmacist is there to treat the patient. All it's doing is the calculations that can be done so much quicker than even the most talented doctor or pharmacist can do, and they are still there to check that the decision is correct, that the AI hasn't missed anything that he or she had already considered, and it's that functionality, it's that explainability that you can describe from the start of the process to those who aren't necessarily acutely aware of the coding that goes on in order to be able to come to those decisions.
And I think if you, sorry, Tia.
Sorry, go on, John.
Well, I was just going to add that if you explain it in that way, then anybody who's looking at it will go, oh, well, AI is being used as a decision support mechanism or whatever else. It's a medical device, and therefore it has to go via the MHRA to be checked, etc., to ensure that it meets all these particular criteria of a medical device. The thing about explainability, if you do it right, is then you end up getting the appropriate governance in at each stage, because you understand what that bit of AI is actually doing, what purpose it's serving. So you're absolutely right. This isn't about the source code. It's understanding the inputs. It's understanding the stages and where AI is starting to make the decisions. It's understanding the outputs and how those outputs are checked, which is about explainability.
Yeah, and I think that's a gap that I'm definitely seeing is around this idea of how do we test AI. So historically, when we look at traditional software development, it's always been around, we have a really robust set of testing procedures that we would run a platform through. So do we do user acceptance testing? Do we do unit testing? Do we do some cyber and penetration testing? That seems to be particularly lacking at the moment, and it's an immaturity within that particular area of the industry. What I think is probably we've kind of talked around is it explainable? But actually, there's always the unexplainable outcomes that AI can also have. So we just need to be sure that when we're doing that testing, we're going down that route, that we're not just looking for positive testing. Is it doing what we are expecting? But also looking at, is it doing things that we never expected that it may also do? And I think that's a real kind of missed step at the moment.
I'd add into that from the pharmaceutical and medical side, every time you put a system in, you have to go through a whole range of validation testing, which again adds another level. And if you're unsure of what the actual outputs are likely to be, I would have thought it could be quite challenging how to develop, how to look at that. Okay, so that's been really useful, very interesting. Time marches on. We've got a few more minutes to go, but what I thought was perhaps a question to ask. We talked about frameworks. What would your advice be to people here about, should we wait for frameworks to be formalized, or should we just get on with things? You don't have to say yes or no. You can actually expand on the question.
From an ethical responsibility, every organization that uses AI has a responsibility to have a framework in place. Even if it's just a very simple accountability framework, it has to be there. The risks are unimaginable to develop AI with no controls. So you have to have an accountability framework in place as a minimum.
If I could just add to that and say that I think that's absolutely right. No, we shouldn't wait for frameworks or whatever else to come out. AI is moving at such a pace that if you are not doing anything with it, you'll get left behind. And I think that's the fear of businesses and organizations. So a few are burying their head in the sand and saying we don't need AI, but most are saying, we need to actually start looking at AI and looking at how we can integrate this into our business. There's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely absolutely the right thing to do. And for some organizations, absolutely, they'll listen to you and will say, yes, we've got to put some kind of legal frameworks in place. We've got to kind of put some accountability framework. We've got to understand all these things, what we've talked about today. Unfortunately, you're always going to get businesses who they're not really interested in that. What they're interested in is the bottom line. They're interested in saving money. They're interested in getting more money to their shareholders, etc. And they don't understand the risks. And so for me, getting people to put in appropriate frameworks, if that only works if people understand AI, if they're AI literate. So we've used some, I think to a certain extent we've tried to dumb down today a little bit to try and make what we're saying understandable, but understanding what sort of models you're dealing with, understanding what problems those models have, how likely are they to hallucinate, to give you the wrong answer, what are the risks attached, what we talked about in the beginning. Those are the things that have to be understood. 5-10 years ago, we talked about the real importance of data literacy before you go and kind of start using your statistical tools and all those kind of things in your dashboards and pumping data out there, because it might be wrong. So understand data, understand where it's come from, what Tia talked about at the beginning, understanding the provenance, understanding the data quality, all those kind of things. We're now in a world where we're saying that's really important, but AI literacy is important as well. The two go hand in hand. So it's not only where that data's come from, etc., but it's like your AI, what has your AI been trained on? Yeah, and that's the data, and it's all those kind of things. It's understanding all those kind of things. If you understand those things, and you train people in AI literacy, then they will start to understand the risks. And if they start to understand the risks, they will want to put in frameworks. That's the kind of thing. And I think the problem is that people are going from the other end at the moment. There's so much hype around that says AI will do this, AI will do that, AI will do the other, that they're just jumping in and using it without understanding the implications.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with what both John and Hugh have just said. I think where we struggle as data professionals is perhaps the language in how we communicate some of those risks. So if I'm sat down with my exco, for example, and I talk to them about data risks and what that means for model drift and those sort of things, they're somewhat alien. And I do think we need to get better in terms of equating that to the impact that will have on the business. So if you've got model drift, well, what does that mean? If you've, say, for example, replaced half of your team with some AI agents, well, actually, if that model drift is inaccurate, you've then got the outputs of half of your team is off. How do you deal with that? Well, actually, in historical days, you'd retrain your staff. But actually, well, if you've built your business on that AI, you've then got to switch it off. You've got to retrain it. What is the outage on that? And what does that actually mean in terms of your revenue and your bottom line? And I think we need to get into a position where actually we're able to articulate what the risks and the impacts are, because people care more about the impacts than the risks themselves. I agree with John very much that a lot of businesses will fly seat of the pants and kind of go, oh, risks may never happen. But if they are fully aware of what that impact looks like in terms of their business, their organization, whether they're commercial or public sector, it becomes a lot more realistic and a lot more real and a lot more tangible to them in a way that they can understand. I think sometimes when we talk about AI and data, it feels a little bit too technical. It feels like something that they don't, a lot of people, when I sit down with them, they don't even know what AI or what data is. To them, it's a word that they've heard. And so we need to kind of shift the language a little bit in terms of how we communicate what those risks and impacts look like.
That's really good. And you actually lead me on, I think, to another really good question. Perhaps we've sort of turned a little. We're back to your office and you're sitting with your exco team. What do you say to them to convince them in a positive way rather than, oh my God, the world's going to fall down about our ears? How do you convince them that it's a really good thing for them to put company resources into putting a proper governance in place? That's what would you say?
That's always it's a challenge that data professionals have come up against for many, many years, even when it was just traditional data governance around Why do I care? Why do I care around who owns the data? Why do I care around the fact that data quality is poor? Why do I care about these things? And for me, going back to the last point, people don't care around risks a lot of the time, but what they do care about is bottom line, and they do care around opportunity. And if they think there's money that they could be getting, then they want that. Whereas people generally don't really, and they're not really interested in spending money in something that doesn't appear to have any kind of return on investment. So if you're sat down with your exco, for example, I would be wanting to be talking about, well, actually, if you understand that underlying data, then, and you've got a good governance program in place, well, actually, your path to innovation is faster because you understand where you've got consent, for example. If you've got no consent, there's no path to putting it into a live environment. So you've got that, therefore, you're not wasting money on that. You've got, you can have more reliable outputs. No one wants to have AI that doesn't give them reliable outputs. So there's another opportunity. If you're thinking around, you have, if you've got data owners, for example, put in place, you have better engagement with your business. So actually, you've got better use cases coming out. And so you have to frame it in such a way that the business is able to understand that this is an opportunity for them to really get hold of AI, to drive it out in a way that gives them value themselves, but also unlocks that path to innovation and gives them a quicker path into the live environment than they currently have. So if you don't have that governance in place, you don't have transparency, you don't understand the lineage and where the data's been changed and morphed and passed through 10 different hands, it's a lot more difficult to prove that the AI is going to give you reliable outputs, but also it's going to take you 10 times as long to get it into live, because you then need to go back and sort of reverse engineer everything that's happened to that data. And so it really has to be positioned in a way that this is the benefit it's going to give you, rather than this is what it's going to cost and this is the risk. So you have to frame it in a way that's very positive and gives them opportunities rather than problems to solve.
Which I love. So you've got path to innovation. The path to innovation is faster. We've got more reliable outputs, so it's going to take less time to get the product to market. I also like the idea of the better engagement with the business. Do Hugh and John, do you have anything you'd like to add to that particular?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, again, part of the often forgotten human element to AI, is that we can sit here and list the benefits and the risks of governance frameworks, etc. But actually, they're just features of what may or may not happen. What we need to understand is the motivators of the people using or responsible for building the system. If their motivators are, like Tia says, to increase revenue, then that is why you will demonstrate that a well-governed system will provide consistent revenue, and why an unregulated system poses the risk of losing everything. But similarly, some people are maybe motivated by the greater good. Some people may be motivated by doing less work, greater speed, and that's why when talking and thinking about creating any form of governance framework for something like AI, particularly that doesn't have that human element intrinsically within it, that is where you need to have the personal touch and be able to, for you to integrate with your team, to understand what motivates them, in order for, there's no point selling a benefit of a process that if the person who is developing that process doesn't want to buy it, doesn't want to buy that.
Can I just take we've got a question from the floor, which is quite interesting. It builds upon this, but it's saying that often there are examples of companies ignoring risks of lack of governance, like quality standards. Hence, you get faulty and dangerous products, and companies that are just not making the investment now, but just settle when a lawsuit results from the product. And the question really is, how can you truly convince an organization now, when they've put that in big capital letters? I'm guessing this is very near and dear to the gentleman's or lady's heart, to invest in AI governance rather than pay the bill later when something goes wrong.
So I just say that the risks of AI and A is far bigger than risks of bad data. So your risks are escalated. So this is about reputation. Whatever we've seen in the past by data breaches and those kind of things, etc. As soon as people are their lives or their livelihoods are put at risk at scale, then I think it will be reputationally so damaging for an organization that you will see organizations disappear. In the EU Act, when you talk about fines, you're talking about fines of between 7.5 and 35 million euros. So those are kind of quite hefty fines, or up to 7% of turnover. I mean, the fines of these are out there, they're huge fines. And I think that you'll find that it's not like now where people can avoid fines. I think that, certainly in the EU, the people will be fined all the time. So I think it's monetary and it's reputation.
I believe that's being enforced in 2026. I was reading it just recently. So let's hope they do that. One more, Tia, I'm sorry, perhaps you could deal with the other question that's also come through, which says, beyond human controls, what are your thoughts on technology engineered controls? I guess that's AI to manage AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really interesting session about this a few months ago around how do we begin to use technology to govern AI. And at the moment, obviously, the technology is not quite there. There's no standardization across AI in terms of tools, programming languages, all that kind of stuff that you would want. So figuring out how you get AI to manage AI is a bit of a challenge. But I think ultimately that's where we'll end up. And certainly the discussions that we've been having sort of on an international platform, so across the likes of governments and the UN and so on, is around the idea that there will be a centralized AI platform that will do that regulation for people. It will do the accreditation and assessment. But, the technology just isn't there yet. And I think, if you're looking at something that is a globally implemented platform that, has interoperability across everything, the only time we've ever really managed to do it was global payment system, and it was incredibly painful. And when you look at AI versus banking, you're looking at a technology that covers all industries in all languages, that has no standardization and all use cases, in a way that banking just doesn't. Transactions of payments in, payments out is not quite the same in terms of complexity. So I think it will take much longer. But, with my pro AI hat on, I'm also thinking that, we have the technology to kind of figure that out for itself when that happens. And so, we're probably looking at least 10 years further out, but I think that's on the agenda.
We'll have to reconvene sometime very soon, or not too distant future, and find out. Folks, I apologize. We have only a certain time and we have to now start to wrap up. I hope you found it really interesting. I hope you've got something from it. We will be showing some contact details in a minute, which if you'd like to carry on some conversations or discussions, then please use those and we'll pick them up, and we'd love to talk further and take those discussions further. In the meantime, can I say a massive thank you to Tia? Just amazing, wonderful stuff. Really appreciated your time. Hugh, equally, such good input, and John, just really good to have all three of you on the call today, and I hope you all got as much from it as I think I did, and thank you very much. So we'll say cheerio to you. In the Know has a number of areas that, again, we'd very much like to help you if we can. You can see assessment of AI use. You can see understanding of the compliance side and the skills to develop and build the workforce. We haven't managed to touch on some of those today, but we hope that's of interest to you. Then you'll please reach out to us. In the meantime, I want to say a massive thank you to all of you. As I say, the contacts page is just coming back up. We have so appreciated your time, your attention, and I hope you found it valuable. Please leave us some feedback or get in touch to let us know what you thought. And again, let us know if you'd like to do something more like this.